hand it over to Allie.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christine. Um, and thank you all for being here. It's so exciting to be here on a Monday night and to have the opportunity to talk about step 4. So as Christine said, my name is Allie. And I am an alcoholic. That's the most important thing. I also have the privilege of working at Caron. So as I look around the screen, I see so many familiar faces, and I'm really excited. Again, I'm really excited to be with you all. So first, just so I don't forget, to read the step itself. So step 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. I think that, in kind of setting the stage, I'll tell you a little bit about myself um, without going into too much of my story, because to be honest, it's not that interesting. Um, so I think, especially given that there's a mix of alums and parents on the call, I always like to talk a little bit about my childhood in that I had a great one. I had a great childhood. I had great parents who were very involved at every sports game. Um, gave me every advantage that they possibly could. There is alcoholism and addiction in my family, on both sides, but because of that, my parents raised me without really having alcohol in the house. They told me from a young age that this was something that I needed to watch out for, that people, in our family often didn't handle their alcohol well. Um, and I say all of that because none of that made a difference for me in terms of whether or not I personally struggled with the disease of addiction. What it did make a difference in for me was when and how I reached out for help. So my anniversary date is January 29th. So in just a couple of days, 2013. So I'll be celebrating 12 years of sobriety, which is honestly surreal, very hard for me to believe. And, it's, still in a lot of ways surreal for me to look at what my life is like now. Um, but, but when I look back on growing up and kind of everything that led me into the rooms, I think about the fact that so much of what was on my 4th step is why I drank, right? And that's how it's all intertwined. So, while I had this amazing family, parents that loved me, told me how great I was, did everything that they possibly could to set me up for success, I struggled with a lot of anxiety. I struggled, the way I think about it is I struggled in a lot of ways with the way that I interacted with the world and what I thought about you sitting across from me. Because I was constantly doing what I like to call mind reading, right? So I was sitting across from you, projecting on to you all of these ideas that I thought that you had about me and how you didn't think that I was good enough and I wasn't smart enough and I wasn't funny enough and I wasn't pretty enough and just all of those things. I wasn't enough, right? And then I drank for the first time when I was pretty young, right? And that was that magic thing for me. And despite the fact that when my parents, told me that people in our family don't necessarily handle their alcohol well, this is something you need to watch out for. And I said, no, no, could never be me. I'm, every disqualifier that I could have thought of, right? Um, Despite that, um, I had that reaction to alcohol where I just lit up. I just lit up from it. I loved it. All of those voices that I was, the committee in my own head that I would project onto you, that all became quiet. And all of a sudden, I did feel good enough. So for me, that led to a fast and furious relationship with drinking, which landed me in the hospital a number of times, which, scared the people around me. which led me to behave in a way that felt so out of character for me. And I would often, and again, I say this because I think it's relevant to the fourth step. I would often wake up in the morning, and I know that this is not a unique experience, but I would wake up in the morning after a night of drinking feeling so much shame. And I would at times sit across from someone, a friend, at the time, one of my parents, and I would say, I'm so sorry. I would never do that. I would never do that. And the reality was that I meant that. That wasn't me trying to get one over. That wasn't me, trying to deceive them. I meant it. I would never do that. But I did. And the next thing that I would say is, I'm so sorry. I promise I'll never do it again. And I meant that too. I meant that too. I will never do it again. Now, I didn't mean I'll never drink again at that time. I meant I won't black out. I won't put myself into a bad situation. I won't get in trouble. I won't fill in the blank. I won't do that bad thing. Instead, I'm going to figure out how to drink normally. I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out how to drink normally. Never, the embarrassing part is never did it occur to me to stop drinking. Honestly, it did not, that was not even on my radar. It was all about, how do I drink like everyone else around me? And so I tried all, you read in the big book, and I remember the first time I read the big book, the first couple of pages, I just thought, what is this? How, why am I here? What am I doing reading this? This doesn't apply to me at all. And then I remember getting to the section where they talk about the half measures. And that was one of those things where I read it and all of a sudden I started to see myself. And all of a sudden, rather than identifying out, I started to identify in, because I realized that, while I was in my 20s and young and doing well in a lot of ways and, had all of these things that I thought, again, disqualified me from being an alcoholic, I knew that I had spent really probably since the first 6 months that I started drinking, I had spent that time. So the entire time I was drinking, I spent it counting drinks, setting rules. I'm only going to drink on certain days of the week. I'm only going to drink in these situations. I'm only going to drink after this time. I'm going to ask someone else to watch the number of drinks I have. I'm going to measure it out and have one bottle, and that is my one bottle that I'm allowed to have. What I learned later on in the rooms of AA in this community is that normal drinkers don't need to try that hard to drink normally, right? But again, that was, in AA, they say the strange mental blank spot. That was my strange mental blank spot. The other mental blank spot that I had was that I thought of myself, and still do, as a caring, loving, thoughtful friend, daughter, sister. I could not see that my own actions were hurting other people. I was one of those people who would have told you, leave me alone. I'm not hurting anyone else. Somehow my strange mental blank spot was I couldn't realize the fact that there were people who loved me. And so by hurting myself, I was hurting them. I was robbing them of their safety and security, their peace of mind. They didn't know kind of which version they would get of me. And I was robbing myself of a lot of things. So all of that led me to burn out really quickly, and find myself in need of help. There are so many things, and this is what, for me, really helped me start to believe that there was something greater than myself, because I I truly believe that if any one thing along my path had been different, I don't know if I would have ended up here. It was, my parents intervened at the right time. I walked into the right meeting at the right time. I raised my hand at the right time. The right person came up to me after, right? All of those things that I had no control over, I couldn't have designed, I wouldn't have designed, led me to be in a place where I was willing. Um, so getting to step work. I guess I'll also just throw out there that I went to meetings for months and sat in the back. I kept showing up. I kept, if I was called on, I would share. But I honestly did not know whether I identified as an alcoholic. I didn't know whether I belonged there. And I would say that in shares, I would say, well, I didn't do this and I didn't do this. And I don't know if I should call myself an alcoholic. I think maybe I'm overreacting, but my mom and my therapist said I have to be here, right? And I just kept coming. And I remember at one point, finally, I used to go to a meeting at 12 o'clock every day. And it was a lot of people with a lot of time, a lot of people who were a lot older than me. And I remember one day this woman pulled me aside and she said, I've heard you, struggle with this for months at this point. And she said, let me ask you a question. Was drinking making your life worse? And I said, well, yes. I can point to these things of ending up in the hospital and, getting in trouble and making, people scared and all of these things, right? Is drinking making your life worse? Yes. Did you keep doing it anyway? Yes. And she said, okay, that's all you need to know. If you can answer those two questions, yes, then you can say you're an alcoholic. She said, the debate's over. And again, that was the right message that I needed to hear at the right time. So I ended up stringing along some time, got a sponsor, started my step work. And what I will say about my step work is I was, trying to be an A+ student at AA for the first 3 steps. So I found a sponsor, and that's a scary process, but I found someone who had what I thought I wanted. I listened to shares. I went up to her afterwards and I asked her to be my sponsor. We started meeting, and steps 1, 2, and 3, we would meet, we would read out of the big book, and then I would go home and I would have homework before we met again. And 1, 2, and 3, I would leave her and I would text her about an hour and a half later and say, done, when should we meet? Right? Because I wanted to ace this. I wanted to be the best AA person that, if I was going to be an AA, best AA person that there ever was, right? And then I got to step 4. And I had heard so much about step 4. So again, made a searching and fearless moral inventory. I had heard so much about step 4, and it scared me. Because, the rumblings that I heard, which are not actually what my experience was, but the rumblings that I heard was, oh, in AA, you have to make this list of everything you've ever done wrong. Right? And so for someone that is anxious, full of shame, and newly in recovery, to take a look at that is terrifying. Right? So I took my time in starting it. I started to procrastinate. I, was still going to meetings, but I was putting it off. I met with my sponsor a couple of times to talk about it. And something that really kind of changed the way I looked at it is I eventually told her what I was afraid of. I said, I don't know that I'm ready to take a look at everything that I've ever done wrong. And she said, that's not what this is. This is a searching and fearless moral inventory. And it's a very concrete, sort of tangible thing. So there are lists, and I'm going to talk about those lists that you make. And through that, you create a roadmap. and that roadmap is going to show you how to change. I will also say, so, I felt like I was basically the same person very much and, had the same habits, the same way of interacting with the world and people around me, the same, challenges in my life from when I was a very little kid to the day I got sober, right? The what changed, but kind of like the experience of it for me was the same. So when I heard, this is going to be your roadmap to change, I was very skeptical. I don't know that at that point I really believed that I was capable of changing on any fundamental level. I believed I could maybe stay away from drinking, but did I believe I was going to be happy about it? No. Happy in general? Probably not. Did I feel like there was any chance that I was going to be able to let go of some of these resentments and ways that I felt like the world had just either wronged me or that I didn't fit in the world or that I was scared? No, I didn't think any of that was possible. But the one of the best things that I heard in AA is get out of your own way. So I suspended belief and I said, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to let myself be proven wrong. So I guess just a couple of important things. I did my fourth step out of the big book. There are lots of different ways that you can do it. So there are worksheets. The 12 and 12 is a really helpful tool. So there's a book called The 12 and 12. If any of you aren't familiar, I highly recommend it. It makes everything feel very practical. So read the fourth step in the 12 and 12. On pages 63 through 65 are really where they tackle the fourth step in the big book. And the way that they describe it there is pretty much exactly how I did it. So they tell you to make a chart. And in this chart, you're going to make 4 columns. The first column is going to be people and institutions that you have resentments against. So that was interesting to me just to start because it wasn't make a list of everything that you've done wrong. It was make a list of all of kind of like your grudges and qualms about things, right? Second column was the cause of my resentment, the why of my resentment. Why did I feel, some sort of negative emotion towards this person? Third column was affects my. So there are a whole list right there in the big book of different things that could be affected by some of these resentments. So it could be your self-esteem, your relationships, it could be material, it could be your emotional well-being. There are a number of other ones. And then the fourth column, and this is probably the most important one, is my part. Okay, so we have those 4 columns. And again, this is every sponsor, and this is why it's important to work with a sponsor to do this and not to try to do it because I'll tell you, in early sobriety, I would have looked at this and said, oh, I'm great at worksheets. I've got this. I can do it myself, right? But it's so important to have someone else who has been there, who's gone through it to guide you, because they're going to talk about the nuances of it. So a couple of things that my sponsor told me to do. First, and again, some people will tell you to do it what's called horizontally, which is I write the person, then I write the cause, then my affects my, then my part. Some people will say make a big list of everyone and then work your way through. That was the way my sponsor had me do it. So she said, make a list of everyone that you've had resentments against. And really the way that she described it to me, because there was a part of me that said, well, I don't really, I have good relationships, I have good friendships, I don't have that many resentments. And she said, anyone that plays or has played in the past an important role in your life should be on there. Because there's something there. There's something about the relationship that you probably carry, whether you realize it or not. So the list was, not crazy long, but long. It was, some people will say list everyone you've ever met. That again was not the way she did it, but it was like, if you still have this weird memory of being young and, being teased about something by someone, put them on there. That's important. Um, the people in your family, the people in your lives, anyone that you feel wronged by, any institution that you feel wronged by should be on there. The cause. So column 2. Honestly, if I had not been given direction, I probably could still be working on my first fourth step. Because I could have written you a novel about all of the nuances around each relationship and what I did and what they did. And again, this is all my experience. I'll encourage you to speak with your sponsors around how you do yours, but she told me keep it to 2 sentences. She said, any more than that, you're indulging yourself in the story. So she had me keep it to 2 sentences and get right to the heart of this is why I feel resentful towards this person. And again, this experience really challenged me because it encouraged me to look at relationships that I overall felt very positively about and see what were some of those underlying things, the ugly parts of myself that I didn't want to look at. That was on there. And then it also, made me take a look at the relationships, the burned bridges that I didn't want to look at, that I never wanted to revisit. Those were on there. So again, I kept that relatively short and just kept going. The effects that was very, very interesting for me. Because what I started to see was patterns. So, I made this list, and in my mind, everyone's going to be so different. It's all very different situations, circumstances, relationships, and all of a sudden I get to the cause. And just like I told you, I would sit across from you and think that, I was reading your mind. A lot of the cause were you think, or they think that right? So they think that I am not as blah, 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 or, they didn't, uh, you know, believe in me like in this way. Like there were just all of these things that I realized that I was projecting. And so much of my personal effects, related to self-esteem, related to relationships, emotional well-being, right? Those were the things that kept coming up for me. And so again, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking like, ooh, ooh, there are some patterns here. There are some things that I need to take a look at in myself. And then my part. And what would also come up for me over and over again in my part is I didn't ever let anyone know how I was feeling. I wasn't direct. I didn't ask for anything different. So a big resentment that I had was that I felt like I would do anything for the people in my life, and I didn't think that they would all necessarily reciprocate, right? But did I ask, right? Or did I have these, hidden expectations, setting people up for failure around me, setting people up to confirm something that I believed, a core belief, which was that nobody really cared about me that much, right? And so I'm setting all of these people up in my life to prove me right. You don't actually love me. You wouldn't actually do anything for me. This is not unconditional. See? Right? Because you didn't live up to this expectation. The other part of step 4, and specifically my part that I always think is important to just highlight, is while it is important to look at our part in things, there are things, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but there are things that I did not cause in any way. So there were a couple of things on my list of resentments that as I went through, even as I was, and I'm bleeding a little bit into step 5 where you review it with someone else, but I listed, I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have gotten so drunk, right? Like I'm in this situation and it's my fault. And I remember my sponsor saying that it's so important to realize that my part is not necessarily that you caused something, but it is recognizing whether you're carrying something, what you're carrying. So there were certain things on my 4th step that were really focused on my part is that I am still carrying this and I have not been able to forgive myself or the other person. Right? I've not been able to let go. And so I think that's important that, going through this and looking at your part doesn't necessarily mean that you are putting blame on yourself. It means that you're identifying what you could do differently. So that could be what you could do differently in a relationship. It could be what you could do differently moving forward. So again, not holding on to burdens. So working through all of that, there are 2 other parts, the fears inventory. And so that's a separate list where my sponsor really is exactly what it sounded like. I'm going to list out everything that I'm afraid of, which is a really eye-opening exercise. Because again, so many patterns, a lot of things link back. The same things that were what were affected in that, in that first inventory, those were what was coming up. So it was my self-esteem, I'm not good enough, ambition, all of those types of things were popping up on the inventories, on the fears inventory. And what was important there was to look at how does this play into the way that I behave? How does this play into my relationships? How do my fears drive me? And then the last part is the relationship inventory, which my sponsor made it, very kind of straightforward. She had me list out relationships, and then it was I self-seeking in this relationship? So, in other words, was I trying to fill something in myself with a relationship, or was I truly trying to bring something to a relationship? So it's heavy work. I'm not, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's heavy work. But I will say that through doing all of that work, through making all of those lists and looking at patterns, and again, I won't steal step 5 because that's where you review it with someone. But from doing that part as well, it showed me things about myself that I had blind spots for. I had blinders on. I had no idea that there were certain, patterns in my behavior and my way of thinking that were blocking me so much. And again, like my first sponsor said, this gives you a roadmap out, a roadmap to change. So once I could see those, then all of a sudden it's my responsibility to act differently. And the thing that's really amazing about the steps is they build off of each other. And so I now had all of this awareness and all of this really good information to look out for. that then through the subsequent steps, you start to figure out new patterns of behavior. You start to make amends, and truly free yourself of, the burdens that you've been carrying. You start to behave differently, make living amends. And you prove to yourself that you can. And then some of those things that, affects all of my insecurities, all of my fears, those started to change. I started to get better. And so now almost 12, knock on wood, right? Almost 12 years later, it is so corny. Everyone says it. I remember, if I were anyone who's new on this meeting, I would probably roll my eyes too, but my life is beyond my wildest dreams. And it's not because, people will say it's like, it's not the bells and whistles. It is, I was not dreaming of the right things. I did not believe that I could be happy like this. I did not believe I could be confident like this. I didn't believe that I would have a job that I love so much. Oh my gosh, okay, I could cry, but I will try not to. I have two little boys and I have a healthy marriage. And I don't think about drinking anymore. Um, the last thing I'll say about a fourth step is you don't do it just once. That's the cool thing about all of these steps is, and recovery in general, which I did not think was so cool at the beginning, is that there is no finish line. I remember being like, well, what happens when I graduate? Or like, you get to do it again. But the thing is, you get to continue to pull back layers. You get to continue to get better. And dig deeper and become more fulfilled and become happier. And so it really is, it's an incredible journey. And the fourth step is such a worthwhile part of that. So I've talked longer than I meant to, but I will turn it back to Christine and open it up for any shares and questions.